Welcome to the Drop Pod, a Warhammer 40k podcast focused mostly on lore, sometimes hobby, sometimes the tabletop. I'm your host, Garrett. I'm alone today. I'm alone. Traveling the void, dodging tendrils of the High Fleet. I am usually joined by my great friend, Blake. However, I'm going to be absent for a while in the near future, so I try to prepare something on my own to sort of hold you guys over while I'm gone. Because I know you all crave my sweet, awkward voice. I'm doing something that I have not done before. This is a sort of semi-scripted episode, and it is well outside of my wheelhouse. I haven't written anything really at all in probably a decade. That being said, if you haven't already, please go give us a review on whatever app you listen to podcasts to. I'd really greatly appreciate it. This was a monumental effort for probably very little output. Also, we have a YouTube channel and an Instagram. We post some cool stuff over there, I guess. Mostly models that we paint. Links for those are in the episode description. And without further ado, the first Tyrannic War. As you have probably all heard, the announcement for 10th edition Warhammer 40k is also the heralding of the 4th Tyrannic War, based in Segmentum Pacificus. It is an unprecedented approach vector for the Tyranids. I myself am fairly unfamiliar with the history of the Tyrannic Wars, and I found it difficult to find a single place that compiled all the events of each one into sort of one neat and tidy bundle, so that is what I'm going to attempt to do here. One thing that immediately piqued my interest with the mention of the 4th Tyrannic War is the direction that High Fleet Leviathan is approaching from, that being the galactic west. Until now, Tyranids have only ever approached from the east, presumably entering the galaxy from intergalactic space in the eastern fringe. So, how did High Fleet Leviathan get from the eastern fringe and Baal in Imperium Nihilus all the way to the western side of the galaxy? Did they throw themselves back into intergalactic space below the galactic plane to re-enter the galaxy on the western side? Or is this the largest military pincer movement in history? Has this tendril of the High Fleet been slowly, ponderously working its way under the galaxy while the other tendrils work their way through the Milky Way? What I'm hoping is that as I work my way through the Tyrannic Wars here, I can get a better grasp on which of the aforementioned strategies the Hive Mind is using. Although I have a suspicion that we won't find out until the release of 10th edition. The first Tyrannic War kicks off in the year 745.M41. That is 41,745 for those that are unfamiliar with the commonplace date template of the Imperium. The planet of Tyrann, for which the Tyranids are named after, is an oceanic planet held by the Adeptus Mechanicus. AdMech forces there on the planet have documented throughout recent decades the mysterious dying of nearby worlds. This is corroborated by Mechanicus explorator fleets performing censuses. Prior inhabited worlds have been found to be but barren rock, where once a world full of living, breathing people and life forms, there was now no water, no atmosphere, and no life. Also, notice the interesting language quirk in the naming of the Tyranids. Most people, including those at Games Workshop, pronounce Tyranids the way I have been, as Tyranids. But Tyrann, the planet they are named after, is pronounced Tyrann. And I'm not sure many people would ever look at Tyrann and pronounce it Tyrann, just the way it's spelt. It really doesn't make any sense, but if we're looking for an in-lore explanation, we could say you could chalk it up to the degeneration and widespread misinformation and inaccuracy created by imperial bookkeepers in the Administratum. Although we probably all know what it really is. It's just our own little language quirk here in the real world. So, Tyrann held an impressive but albeit relatively small complement of defensive forces, enough to protect from the odd heretic vessel or chance run-in with Xenos on the eastern fringe. It was not in any way, shape, or form ready for a full-scale Tyranid invasion. Magos Varnak, Mechanicus head honcho on Tyrann Primus, first encountered the Tyranid fleet on the edge of the system. He survived the encounter and fled back to Tyrann, where he found the Astropaths were unable to send calls for aid. They were alone, and no help was on the way. The yet-to-be-named Tyranids cast their Shadow of the Warp over Tyrann. Less than a week later, the High Fleet arrives and the invasion begins. So I feel compelled to remind you that, lacking the corridor of compressed space created by the Narval, hive ship, Tyranid travel within system is quite slow, hence the week of lag time there. The defenders of Tyran are quickly overrun after the Tyranids performed the classic feigned rout in their first display of real intellect and tactical competency. In his final moments, Mingos Varnak sent a data codex plummeting into the depths of the oceans below the doomed base. In that codex, there was his final words, and they read as, quote, "We cannot live through this. Mankind cannot live through this. In a single day, they have covered this planet with a flood of living blades in needle-fanged mouths. Kill one and 10 take its place. If they are truly without number, then our race is doomed to a violent death before every shred of our civilization is scoured away by a force more voracious than the fires of hell themselves. Death. By the machine god, death is here." This data codex would be recovered by the now infamous Inquisitor Cryptman. If you've been keeping up with the Tyranids in current lore, you know who Cryptman is. He recovers it around a year later. He would go on to give the new invading Xenos their name, the Tyranids, after Tyran. Cryptman would later travel to the Thandros system to utilize the telepathic matrix located there. This matrix that orbited Thandros 1 boosted astropathic signals to such a degree as to allow them to be sent nearly anywhere in the galaxy. It's a great plan until he arrives and discovers that, much like Tyran, Thandros 2 has been scoured. Cryptman then, presumably leveraging the many talents of an undoubtedly large inquisitorial retinue, salvaged what he could of the Matrix and returned it to a functional state. Using the Matrix, he then sends Varnak's data codex as well as his own report to the Ordo Xenos, which, if you're unfamiliar, the Ordo Xenos is a department of the Holy Inquisition of Terra that specializes in dealing with the many alien threats and races found throughout the galaxy. The Holy Ordos reply to Cryptman with orders to make all speed for Macragge, the homeworld of the Ultramarines and the resting place of the yet-to-be-resurrected Rabute Gilliman. Lastly, the message contained the Inquisition's classification for this Hive Fleet, that being Behemoth, named after an ancient and foreboding legend. The newly named Hive Fleet Behemoth goes on to devour many worlds in its path. We know of a few worlds that lost their battles, but I must imagine there are nearly countless other worlds with little to no intelligent life present, or perhaps housed small outposts that, much like the one on Tyran, are lost and forgotten before they can even call for aid, having no idea there is this looming threat approaching them. With each one it consumes, the Hive Fleet grows and swells in numbers and size, consuming all of the world's resources and converting it into whatever material it may need to craft new and terrifying bioforms. Records exist of a few worlds or space stations that Behemoth encounters along its path. Oculus, Jaga, Thandros, Solemnes, Prandium, Sabari, Shaoyor, Kurnov, and Macragge are all such places. Jaga was an orc world held by the freebooter clan known as the Star Krumpas and ruled by Captain Black Git. That is Captain with a K. Black Git. I don't know if they can get away with that one nowadays, but we'll let it slide. Also, Star Krumpas. Classic name. Classic orc name. Very similar to my own custom warband, that being the Star Wranglers. Did not know these Star Krumpas exist, although I should have guessed. The Star Krumpas had amassed a large kill cruiser fleet, also cruiser with a K, that had plagued shipping and trade routes in the southern reaches of the Ultima Segmentum. These are the classic privateering style of freebooters we all know and love. However, their fleet was no match for Behemoth. They made a great show of it before being turned into a green Tyranid slurry. Nevertheless, I'm sure the lads under Black Git had an absolutely uproarious time in their final moments. We move now on to Oculus. That is not Oculus, the VR by Facebook, now known as Meta. It is the space station observatory manned by the Imperium. It is likewise destroyed and consumed without much of a fight. Not much is known of Oculus, despite being under Imperial control for some 9,000 years. Perhaps some administratum errors there. What we do know is that it was a bio-artifact of ancient origin. The bio-artifact part leads me to believe that the moon-sized base bolstered the resources of Behemoth more than a sort of non-bio-artifact station of similar size would. I don't know if this thing was alive in some way or another, but interesting nonetheless. In contrast to Oculus, Solemnes is a place the Tyranids do not wish to visit. Those familiar with Solemnes probably already know why. This planet, turned into a museum gallery, is home to our most beloved interstellar kleptomaniac, known as Trazyn the Infinite. Solemnes is a tomb world of the Nihilak dynasty, Nihilak, something like that, to which Trazyn is an overlord. Recognizing this tomb world held nothing of value to the Tyranids, two minor splinters of High Fleet Behemoth made large course corrections to bypass it and found themselves stranded in the void. No resources left. No consumable worlds nearby. These splinters entered hibernation. I don't know if they've been destroyed since. Presumably they're just sitting there, waiting to be reawakened by the writers at Games Workshop. Even our pointy-eared and far-seeing humanoid counterparts could not avoid tragedy in the face of Behemoth. The Eldari maiden world of Shao-Yor, I think I'm pronouncing that right, was laid low by the Great Devourer. Although Craftworld Bieltan came to aid, the world was ravaged by titanic biomonstrosities clashing against the ever-graceful Eldari grav tanks. An especially effective Tyrannic came to be known as the Bane of Shao-Yor in this battle. The world of Sibari shares a similar fate, absorbed by Behemoth despite being the fortress world of the renegade chapter of Astartes known as the Death Shadows. Probably the only time the Death Shadows have ever seen writing on a page was their own destruction. Prandium, known as the Jewel in Ultramar's crown, was easily overcome by the Tyranids, despite aid from the Ultramarines. You know, it's not often we see the Ultramarines really bent over in such a fashion, but their worst reckoning is still yet to come. It's on the way. So Prandium is lost along with its local PDF, that PDF being the Planetary Defense Force, not to mention the ample food that must have been stored on such an agri-world of the 500 worlds of Ultramar. Macragge was next in line. After the embarrassing defeat at Prandium, Chapter Master of the Ultramarines Marneus Calgar declared that Behemoth would be halted at Macragge. And that's basically all it took. I mean, history basically writes itself after Marneus Calgar makes such a statement. We all know what's going to happen. Nevertheless, Marneus spent half a fortnight meditating on the loss suffered at Prandium, and upon his emergence, he told his battle brothers that they were guilty of the sin of pride. The Ultramarines had to improvise, adapt, and overcome, just like the Marines of present. They had to abandon the harrying attacks and guerrilla-like warfare they had waged on the Tyranids in favor of static defenses and concentrated firepower. The famous battle for Macragge began much like you would expect any Tyranid invasion to begin. Millions of mycetic spores are fired at Macragge. Now, mycetic spores, if you are unfamiliar, are the sort of payload, the transport by which Tyranids bring almost anything to the surface of a planet. So millions are fired at Macragge. Millions more are blasted from the skies by the defenses built on Macragge. And still yet, millions are landing on the surface, delivering their biological payloads in varying forms, whether it be warrior beasts, gaunt strains, toxins, acid, or even chemicals that alter the atmosphere of the planet. Now, Calgar had selected the north and south polar fortresses as the defensible positions the Tyranids would be halted at. It was the role of First Company Ultramarines to bolster these defenses with the aid of the PDF, while Marneus Calgar and the entirety of Second Company Ultramarines met the Tyranids in the field at Cold Steel Ridge. Calgar's goal was to slow the Tyranid advance to buy defenders more time to prepare the fortresses. It was not long before the Hive Mind identified Marneus Calgar as the largest threat to its success. The Swarm Lord itself is summoned to deal with Calgar. For those unfamiliar with the Swarm Lord, let me elaborate. The Swarm Lord is one of the few instances of individual autonomy and memory retention among the myriad Tyranid bioforms. It is akin to the Hive Tyrant in appearance and function. However, it is the pinnacle of the Hive Mind's creations. The Swarm Lord sports 4 bone sabers for weapons. No ranged weapons on this bad boy. He's got a cunning intellect, and with millions of smaller beasts to carry out his will, the Swarm Lord preys on civilizations. However, on this day, his prey was none other than Mr. McSisterfister, Mr. Hulkhands, Marneus Calgar. Cold Steel Ridge is in utter turmoil. The Ultramarines reinforce the line wherever possible, but much of their efforts are useless. A brood of Carnifexes tear open the famous Baneblade, pride of Hera, and gargoyles prey upon the baseline human leadership, throwing the command structure into complete disarray. The Swarm Lord screams a challenge to Calgar and charges him, probably rolling boxcars or double sixes on the charge roll. Calgar's honor guard rush to his aid, but are ambushed by a horde of Hormagaunts that have been playing possum, or sort of like playing dead, waiting for this one ploy to be played. The hive mind is smart, and the hive mind had foreseen the daring charge by Calgar, presumably having deduced it would happen after hearing courage and honor recited probably hundreds of times through the ears of its lowliest fodder. Calgar fights alone, and even he, Marneus Calgar, chapter master of the bluest boys in town, plot armor thicker than the walls at the Eternity Gate, succumbs to the Swarm Lord. But then he doesn't. Thunderhawks arrive just in time to clear a landing area and evacuate the survivors. Captain of the Honor Guard, Aloysius, sacrifices himself to the Swarm Lord and its guards to buy time for Calgar to be recovered and evacuated. The Thunderhawks then return the beaten and battered 41st Millennium Greco-Romans to the fitfully named battle barge Octavius. Cold Steel Ridge is gone, and the path to the northern polar fortress is wide open. Within that polar fortress lays a special someone, bound in stasis. If the polar fortress falls, Gilliman himself will be reconstituted into spacebug biomass. Now, this made me wonder, given the literal long road ahead of the Tyranid swarm, does the hive mind create any sort of fast transport for them? Does it quickly construct some sort of biological autobahn in order to move its ground units over long distances? Or does the Swarm Lord have to trudge his six-legged insect ass all the way up to the North Pole? I don't know. Maybe they throw themselves in the nearest reclamation pool now that the local threat is eliminated, or perhaps they crawl into the literal open abdomen of some gargantuan flying creature. Well, I read on and I found the answer, at least for this instance. While the battle on the ground was taking place, the battle in orbit was disastrous. Macragge's defenses had been destroyed, giving the Hive Fleet free rein to shower the northern polar fortress in even more mycetic spores. Having dumped its load, that is to say, its payload of spores, the Tyranid fleet withdrew from Macragge, and Calgar pursued it to a planet on the edge of the system named Circe, something like that. Yeah, Calgar, he's the guy that was basically just cut to ribbons on the surface. Yeah, he's commanding the fleet now, by the way. At this planet, Circe, both factions had planned an ambush. Behind the planet hid a second Tyranid fleet. As the Nids sprung their trap, an armada of Imperial reinforcements dropped from the warp and into real space to conduct our second mention of pincer movements. The newly bolstered Imperial fleet numbered in the hundreds of warships. It was still outnumbered by a large margin. In a sort of sacrificial courage and honor moment, the Emperor-class battleship named Dominus Astra flew straight into the heart of the Hive Fleet and detonated its warp drives, opening a warp vortex and sucking Behemoth into the Empyrean. By this time, the fleet had lost contact with the northern polar fortress. Elements of 3rd Company Ultramarines are sent to investigate, and when they land, they fight their way through a token force of Tyranids and into the depths of the fortress. There, in the lower Penetorium, which is a word made up by Games Workshop, lay a circle of Terminators who fought back-to-back in the last stand of 1st Company. Having been killed to the last man in defense of Macragge, 1st Company did not return to full strength until 116 years later. Macragge was saved and Behemoth halted, just as Calgar declared. It should be noted that a smaller splinter of Behemoth attacked Calth and was repelled. However, in this battle, Old One-Eye gets his name, and his first time in the spotlight, swatting away tank battalions and recovering from mortal wounds. He plagues Ultramar to this day. And so ends the First Tyrannic War. Not even a full Terran year has passed since its start, and the Ultramarines save the day. Although it was somewhat refreshing to see the poster boys take the hard L in the destruction of their 1st Company. But I'm honestly surprised it only took 116 years to rebuild the company, considering how each one of them was a probably grizzled and hardened veteran. It makes me wonder if some of those newly inducted veterans into the 1st Company ranks weren't, quite what 1st Company used to be. I can imagine some of the survivors making brotherly jokes about that, but, there weren't any. Okay, on to the Second Tyrannic War. It is 250 years after the destruction of Behemoth and the ravaging of Macragge. The first Tyrannic War ends, and the second begins. It is 990.M41. And following the first Tyranid invasion of the galaxy, the Imperium of Man has increased military presence and authority in various sectors of the Ultima Segmentum. After 250 years of no perceived Tyranid threat, some of these systems and planets began to question the need for, this military authority and presence, maybe some martial law happening there. We'll see. One group in particular, known as the Brotherhood, rose on a popular planet named Icar 4, as it decried the imperial overreach and preached the imminent arrival of the God Emperor of mankind. Perhaps maybe even the many-armed God Emperor of mankind. The Brotherhood has captured the hearts and minds of the citizens across Icar 4. Its proliferation was out of control. Citizens that had, for their entire lives, been working in hive slums in Manufactura that were the linchpin of imperial defense in the sector were all too ready to usher in the arrival of the God Emperor and perform the bidding of the Brotherhood. If you are at all familiar with gene stealer cults, you can probably see where this is going. Tensions rise rapidly, and the Brotherhood refuses to pay its imperial tithes, and we all know that's a big no-no. It also disallows any of its members to join the PDF, which is the Planetary Defense Force. The Brotherhood's confidence grows rapidly, and so do its militias, and it's not long before they are roaming the streets of the largest cities on the planet and punishing the non-believers as they saw fit. A mass demonstration, likely organized by the Brotherhood, turns into a riot, and the Arbites respond. The infamous, or famous depending on which side you're on, Adeptus Arbites gun down some of the Brotherhood militia, and a large mob of cultists surge forward several times and force the Arbites to withdraw. When the PDF is called upon for aid, they mobilize as requested, but mostly on the wrong side. Much of the PDF has secretly joined the Brotherhood, and it wasn't long before Lehman Russ tanks decorated with the banners of rebellion were rolling down city streets and quashing any remaining loyalist resistance. I can imagine that the banners on those Lehman Russes had many heretical and profane images of the many-armed Emperor of mankind. The last bastion of true loyalty on Icar 4 finds its home in the fortress headquarters of the Adeptus Arbites. However, even that is overrun in short order. This whole planet has basically been lost to the cults. And this happens on the same day a particular Inquisitor Agmar arrives on scene. The Arbites are forced to once again withdraw from the fortress and instead take control of 4 main power stations on the planet. These provide most of the entire planet, if not the entire planet, with power. Inquisitor Agmar makes the accurate and obvious observation that this rebellion is way too organized to be a simple outburst of feelings, and calls the Ultramarines for aid. And at this point in the timeline, an all-out war is being waged on the surface of Icar 4. The Imperial forces begin bombing cities. That gives you any indication as to how bad things are going. They are repelling assaults on the power stations. And 6 days after Agmar arrives, the loyalist forces are forced to withdraw, but not before destroying the power generators, cutting power to most of the world. This rebellion turned war now takes the face of attrition next. It was described in a way that reminds me of the street-to-street and door-to-door fighting undertaken by the U.S. Marines in the Battle of Hue City or the Second Battle of Fallujah. However, it really does feel a little bad comparing a real battle to a make-believe one. On that note, there is one glaring similarity that I like to draw, and that's that both the religious cult of the many-armed emperor and the delusional Islamic insurgents of real life are radicals in every way. They just wish death upon their enemies for ideological disagreements, basically. Okay, that is all of the cringe and modern geopolitical intricacies I have for today. That being said, the cities on Icar 4 are in utter turmoil, and the U.S. Marines will not be there to save them. Or will they? The 41st millennium equivalent of the United States Marines shows up on day 39. That is to say, the fucking Ultramarines show up. I know, we only got 2 paragraphs before we had to go back to the Ultramarines again. Thank you, Games Workshop. We love the poster boys. Drop pods deploy from the battle barge named Octavius. And you can imagine the glee and self-confidence of the rebels being almost instantaneously crushed once the drop pods land, and our big dick swinging boys in blue start turning baseline humans into pastes and pieces of like varying viscosity. I almost feel bad for them. Poor rebels. I'm sorry to announce that your 15 minutes of fame has come to an end. I'd like to introduce you to my bolt gun. Okay, First Company Terminators are back, and they are teleporting here, there, and everywhere. And in one of these teleport strikes, they come across the first confirmed contact on Icar 4 with Tyranid bioforms. They come in the form of gene stealers, purebred gene stealers. And these First Company Terminators slay a small infestation of, mere hundreds of gene stealers. And they are rewarded with a prime time fight in the super heavy weight class with the patriarch of the cult. If you do not know what a patriarch it is basically a gene stealer, but more so. They've been on that sweet Tyranid growth hormone, and they are twice the size of a Space Marine, and perhaps twice as strong too. And they are potent psychers to boot. Luckily, our Terminator Strike Force is accompanied by a librarian in Terminator armor. I'm just picturing that. The librarian in the Leviathan box set with the Terminator armor on. I don't like his face. It kind of makes me a little bit angry, but nevertheless, he provides the proverbial straw that broke the Patriarch's back, and our strike force of Terminators here strut away with a shiny new title belt from the super heavyweight class, and the rebellion limps away leaderless. And with that, the rebellion falls, and the Imperium once again regains control of Icar 4. Although it is all for naught, local astropaths, report hearing the psychic scream of the Patriarch, and if you know Gene Stealer cults, you know what that means. They also feel the approaching shadow cast within the warp. Inquisitor Agmar reports to the Inquisition that the Tyranids have returned with a new Hive Fleet named Kraken, and Kraken is utilizing Gene Stealers to a much larger degree than its cousin Behemoth. Kraken capitalizes on the confusion and chaos cultivated on cult-held worlds. That's a lot of cults for you. And most of the planets within its path are consumed with ease. We now fast forward 2 years to 992.M41. Kraken draws near to Icar 4. Thousands of pure strain gene stealers pour from the dank and dark depths of the hive all over the planet. And this had to be an embarrassing moment for the Ultramarines, who are usually surrounded by a palpable air of confidence and just majesty. The infestation that they had thought to be eradicated not only survived, but grew and festered. Numbers swelled even under the watchful eyes of the Ultramarines. They knew that the Hive Fleet was coming. Marnius Calgar, now a grizzled Tyrannic war veteran from his run-in with the Swarm Lord last time, 250 years ago, this guy is old as hell, once again leads the planet in defense. Now, Calgar uses the tactics he developed in the first Tyrannic War to repel the Tyranids at Icar 4 in the second war. And we know it's all coming in the inevitable second bout, the inevitable second encounter with the Swarm Lord. Calgar prevails. He slays the monster from beyond the edge of the galaxy. And what I had to assume was just an awesome duel. And I really hope that someday we get some of these, really iconic scenes from the Warhammer universe rendered in an animation, akin to the just quality that Astartes was. I don't know, Games Workshop just hasn't really done that yet. I just got my fingers crossed for Amazon and our Lord and Savior, Henry Cavill. With the Swarm Lord slain, Calgar's masterful tactics make short work of the Tyranid forces on the ground, and they are pushed off the world once and for all. They really got him this time, guys. Trust me. And, victory's achieved, but once again, it's at a great cost. Perhaps not as costly as losing the entirety of First Company, but Icar 4 is ruined. It's borderline uninhabitable, and it has a long road to recovery ahead. 1 year after the devastation of Icar 4, a craft world of our aesthetically remarkably similar pointy-eared space elves stands on the precipice of extinction under the onslaught of Hive Fleet Kraken. This is craft world Iandon, and under the leadership of Farseer Kelman. Kelman sounds like a character in The Office. I don't know why, but he sounds like he fits in the office. Now, Farseer Kelman mobilizes every one of Craftworld Iondan's citizens as guardians, and inhabits the Wraith Guard with souls from the Infinity Circuit, and awakes the Avatar of Cain, the god of war. The impressive Iondan fleet is all but annihilated in the face of the seemingly endless swarm of Tyranid bioships. Mycetic spores fall upon the craft world by presumably hundreds of thousands. All-out war rages on the surface of the craft world Iondan, and the Eldari are taking no chances. Farseer Kelman knew, because of Farseer shenanigans, future forecast sort of shit, that everyone on the craft world is needed to fight, and fight together, if Iondan is to survive this conflict. As the doom of Iondan began to look inevitable, Prince Uriel, a once-damned autarch of Iondan, arrived in system with reinforcements, a large and sizably impressive fleet. Uriel managed to defeat the remaining Void-born forces of High Fleet Kraken and release some of the pressure from the fellow space elves on the ground. No more bioforms are falling on Iondan, but the situation was still dire indeed. A massive hive tyrant that seemed almost impervious to the firepower of the Eldari, impressive as it may be, butchers its way through any and all of the forces that stood before it. The Avatar of Cain challenges the beast in an attempt to provoke an honor duel of sorts. However, this was folly, and I'm surprised the Night Eaters didn't see this coming. Tyranids, as we know, are quite pragmatic. Honor and pragmatism don't always align, and so the Hive Tyrant watched as dozens of its summoned Carnifexes tear the Avatar of Cain to pieces. Prince Uriel saves the day once again. I assume at this point he's earned the title something like the Redeemed. He saves the day once again, plunging into battle wielding the Spear of Twilight. This unique relic spear, while being a weapon of immense power, burns through the life force of its wielder as if it was a fuel source of sorts. Prince Uriel drives the spear through the head of the indomitable Hive Tyrant. With both the Hive Fleet and the leader beast destroyed, the remaining Tyranids revert to their most basic instincts, and the Eldari make short work of the now unorganized foe. Much like Macragge and Ikar IV, Iondan has been ravaged. 80% of its population has perished in its defense. Not to mention the loss of souls locked within the destroyed Spirit Stones, or the immense and gracefully powerful fleet that was lost in the Void as well. The Eldari hopefully learn to never underestimate the Great Devourer. On a similar note of destruction, a planet named Sotha is scoured. Its defenders, a Space Marine chapter aptly named the Scythes of the Emperor, have a dance with the Devourer, and are no better for it. Those of you that may be familiar with Sotha have probably read some of the Horus Heresy, and realize that it is only a matter of time before the Tyranids locate the Milky Way's intergalactic calling card, if you will. Only 90 Marines of the size of the Emperor and a handful of aspirants make it off the planet once it is besieged. Chapter Master by the name of Mensirius Thorsira? Yeah, GW words. Lands the chapter after their escape on the death world of Myril, specifically on the, quote, Giant's Coffin, which is a mountainous, rocky outcropping jutting from a thick jungle canopy below it. There the Scythes make their final stand. The Tyranids, having followed the Scythes to Myril, overrun the Scythes of the Emperor in short order, and even fewer of them escape this planet. Myril is subjected to exterminatus from the battle barge Heart of Cronus, and Captain Thracius is named Chapter Master, after the death of the aforementioned Mensirius Thorsira, whatever you want to call him. There are books dedicated to this story, and I will never do them justice. I am no writer. However, Sotha does have some sort of significance within 40k history and history of the Horus Heresy. It is sort of the birthplace of the greatest bromance in Warhammer history between Barabbas Dantiok, Warsmith of the Iron Warriors, and Alexis Pollux, an Imperial Fist. I haven't read the series of novels regarding their bromance, but I have heard secondhand that it is truly a tearjerker, and it comes highly recommended. I'm sure it will be on my reading list someday. Actually, it is already on my reading list. That is the sum of the most notable planetary engagements of the Second Tyrannic War, after which most of High Fleet Kraken's resources are all but depleted. At least, that's what I assume. I was unable to find any definitive point at which Kraken was declared defeated and perhaps non-existent. This is somewhat of an anomaly, at least when compared against the First and Third Tyrannic Wars, where the fleets are seemingly wiped out in one last climactic battle, or so it seemed at the time. The devastation of Baal appeared to be the end of Leviathan, the battle for Macragge, the end of Behemoth. We now know that Leviathan is alive and well in invading Segmentum Pacificus in what will be the Fourth Tyrannic War. And I'm left wondering, will Behemoth return as well? I forgot to mention that the Lamenters could not escape the traveling catastrophe that was Kraken. The poor Lamenters, man. Their Crusade fleet seemingly accidentally flew right into the gaping maw of the High Fleet and was almost instantly engaged in a fight for their very existence. The Lamenters, blessed be their unfortunate souls, do still exist, thankfully. These sons of Sanguinius, clad in yellow and sporting black and white checkered shoulder pads, seem to have conquered the Red Thirst and the Black Rage, which is quite astounding. And many of the Sons of the Great Angel have searched for the Lamenters in an effort to find out how they pulled this off. However, none of them can ever be found. They're out there somewhere, allegedly, but they are unfindable. I don't think they ever will be found, at least by any other Sons of Sanguinius. Because what is a Blood Angel without the inherent and shameful flaw that makes them so interesting and compelling? They're probably pretty boring. It is only 4 years after the end of the Second Tyrannic War that the Third Tyrannic War kicks off in 997.M41. It is kicked off with the invasion of High Fleet Leviathan, the largest and most devastating High Fleet yet, only to outdo itself again with the largest and most devastating invasion in the Fourth Tyrannic War. But we aren't there yet. Now, this is where I got the answer to my previously posited question regarding the tactics and possible approach vector of High Fleet Leviathan as regards to the Fourth Tyrannic War. Leviathan had presumably been traveling underneath the galactic plane for quite a while at this point. It is 997.M41 again. This is when they make entry into the galaxy, piercing the galactic plane from below within the Ultima Tempestus, and Segmentum Solar. I can only be led to believe that this was but a portion of the entire High Fleet, the rest of the High Fleet continuing westward underneath the galaxy to emerge in Segmentum Pacificus to kick off the Fourth Tyrannic War. My hypothesis regarding a large military pincer movement may have been correct. I assume this is a pincer movement centered around Holy Terra and the psychic beacon that is the Astronomicon and the God Emperor that powers it. This should only be fitting, seeing as how the Tyranids were drawn to the Milky Way by the destruction of the Pharos device on Sotha that we had mentioned earlier during the Horus Heresy. Now, there is an extensive amount of lore and novels written about the Third Tyrannic War, and it is far too much for me to cover in any sort of real detail in this podcast, so I'm going to do my job, or my best I can, to keep it brief and do them justice. If you have any further interest in the Third Tyrannic War, I can highly recommend the two books Dante and The Devastation of Baal. The Third Tyrannic War is hallmarked by 3 notable engagements, the first of which is the Battle of Tarsus Ultra, and I'll let you take a wild guess as to what you think happens there, who emerges victorious, and who saves the day. I'll give you one hint. The saviors of the day are clad in blue. The second is the Cryptus campaign, which culminates in the final and climactic battle known as the Devastation of Baal. And a noteworthy side engagement is the ongoing Octarius War, a war in which the Tyranids of Leviathan are pitted against the Orc Empire of Octarius, an engagement not famous for the Tyranids or the Orcs, but for the controversial scorched earth or scorched planet policy, if you will, taken by our beloved Inquisitor Cryptman, the most genocidal man in human history. He has been present for every Tyrannic war so far, and he has finally seemed to fall from his rocker. Krypton has set up a galactic cordon ahead of the Tyranid advance in the Octarius sector in an attempt to buy time for Battlefleet Solar and Battlefleet Tempestus to muster a defense. Many worlds in the cordon were evacuated before Tyrannic invasion began, and many were not, instead being condemned to the fires of Exterminatus. Billions of innocent worshippers of the God Emperor died at the order of Inquisitor Krypton in what would be the largest genocide since the Horus Heresy. The galactic cordon was successful, albeit costly. It managed to simultaneously slow the advance of this tendril of Leviathan to a crawl and earn Krypton a one-way ticket to anywhere but the Inquisition. However, Inquisitors are often people of principle and sheer fucking will, much like John Wick. Despite being excommunicated, the now defunct Inquisitor continues to take action against Leviathan. He leads a few Deathwatch kill teams on a daring mission to capture a brood of live gene stealers in stasis. The mission is successful, and the brood is planted on Perdition's Flame, which is a space hulk that has emerged in front of the Hive Fleet Leviathan. How convenient. This space hulk is then steered via the destruction of a nearby moon and the change in gravity that facilitates towards the Orcs of Octarius. Now, Orcs are said to be the most numerous race in the galaxy. They gather in numbers from several thousands to perhaps trillions, or, as our boys in green would say, lots. Krypton's hope is that these two enemies, both of which represent a large and perhaps existential threat to the Imperium, will whittle each other away in a sort of war of attrition. Orc versus Tyranid. However, anyone with half a fucking brain can see that anything short of an all-out Orc victory would result in the massive swelling of Tyranid numbers and resources. A Tyranid hive fleet that was already large would have consumed an entire Orc empire that controlled a whole sector. If Leviathan wasn't scary enough already, that would make it scary. And this is, of course, exactly what appears to be happening. While the Orcs put up a good fight, they are ultimately fighting a losing battle in which every Orc that dies represents more organic material for the Hive Fleet to feed on. That means more resources and more Tyranids, more bugs. And while the Octarius War is ongoing, there are several war fronts that have concluded. The first of which is the aforementioned Battle of Tarsus Ultra. Now, I'll let you take a guess as to who you think is involved in the Battle of Tarsus Ultra, and if you're a 40k veteran of even one fucking week, you'll probably figured out that anything that has the word Ultra in it probably involves the fucking Ultramarines. And that's right, the Ultramarines have been in all three Tyrannic Wars, and now we know they've been in the fourth one as well, in the yet-to-happen, yet-to-be unveiled Battle for Algrim. Now, the Ultramarines aren't just sitting on the sidelines either. They're driving this bus. They're defending planets and halting Tyranid hive fleets in their place. And I can't decide if this is Emperor-driven divine intervention, putting his most loyal and effective sons on the front lines to defend the men and women of the Imperium, or if it's just straight-up goddamn bad luck. They happen to be where the Tyranids are at all times. Nevertheless, Uriel Ventress, captain of 4th Company Ultramarines and certified badass, finds himself leading a campaign on the agri-world of Tarsus Ultra. Captain Ventress enlists the help of several different factions, one being the Mortifactors, a Ultramarine successor chapter of 2nd Founding, led by Chaplain Astador. And among the non-super soldiers aiding the defense of Tarsus Ultra were the 10th Logers, Logers, something like that. They are led by Colonel Octavius Rabelag, as well as the 933rd Death Corps of Krieg, led by Colonel Trimon Stagler, as well as whatever planetary defense forces there were on Tarsus Ultra. Oh, and we can't forget our boy either, that guy that puts the kill counts of Stalin and Mao Zedong to shame. Yeah, your boy Inquisitor Krypton is here too, although he has yet to rack up his incredibly high kill count of innocent civilians, since we have done a bit of a rewind here. The yet-to-be-damned Inquisitor does have an extensive knowledge of Tyranids, for he has also been present for, as I said, all three Tyrannic Wars. And when Leviathan arrives in system, the consumption of the planet Barbarous Prime begins immediately. It is consumed with almost zero resistance, but the Imperial forces there do muster a fleet and engage the Tyrannics in space, and they manage to destroy a hive ship. This is no small victory. It is only one hive ship, but hive ships are the largest nodes for the propagation of the hive mind, as well as the largest factories of Tyranid bioforms. Now, Mr. Cryptman does something quite predictable. Well, at least from us looking from the outside in, looking back in time, he requests to invoke Exterminatus upon the next world in the system named Cordalis or Cordiles, Cordalis, something like that. You know, Warhammer words. Obviously, Uriel Ventress, being the courageous and honorable Ultramarine that he is aghast by this proposition, as the evacuation of the planet is already underway. It is, however, slow. An admiral by the name of Tiberius proposes a compromise. Instead of killing millions of innocents, the fleet would detonate a hydrogen plasma refinery in the midst of the Hive Fleet. This compromise was agreed upon and undertaken successfully. However, the sneaking, tricksy Cryptman had lied to Captain Ventress and exterminated the planet anyway with the aid of the mortifactors. There has to be some sort of palpable tension between Uriel Ventress and the Ultramarines and the mortifactors that he has enlisted as help. And I'm starting to like this Cryptman guy less and less. And for some reason, him lying to Uriel Ventress hit harder to me than him killing billions of innocents. It's probably the fact that Ventress has a name and a character built, and you can just write off billions of innocent people with the name of a planet dying. But, I don't know, maybe I'm just an Ultramorons fanboy. Nevertheless, a second attempt is made to blow up a second hydrogen plasma refinery. Like the hydrogen plasma refineries you find all across the world now. However, this time, it is unsuccessful. The mysterious yet extremely powerful hive mind counters this attack, quite literally blowing it up in the face of the Imperials and crippling their fleet in the process. The cowards of the fleet tuck tail and run. The more hardy of the individuals land on Tarsus Ultra and set to defend. The invasion goes about as you would expect any Tyranid invasion to go. The Mosaic spores land by the millions. And somewhere in the melee, Ventress and a Deathwatch kill team capture a lictor. And with the aid of Inquisitor Cryptman, and perhaps his most useful action yet, he concocts a venom from the lictor's DNA that is lethal to early generation Tyranids. Captain Ventress and the Deathwatch he is overseeing conduct a daring boarding action on one of the remaining hive ships. I haven't read this book, but can only imagine what it's like to walk on a hive ship. It's just flesh and sacks and pus and oozes oozing everywhere. The boarding action is successful, and the Norn Queen aboard the ship dies shortly after being infected with the gene poison. The remaining Tyranids break and lose all cohesion when their last link to the hive mind is killed. The remaining bugs are killed by the last defenders of Tarsus Ultra or die and freeze to death in the harsh winter on Tarsus Ultra. The remaining Space Marines number at just 16. That is another devastating loss for the Ultramarines as well as the Mortifactors at the hands of the Great Devourer. And unfortunately for Mr. Ventress, a cowardly telltale within his own chapter, a rival sergeant hoping to become captain, reports him for non-compliance with the Codex. He's accused of abandoning his company to lead the Death Watch on their successful raid. His punishment from exile from the Ultramarines is a death oath. And if you're unfamiliar with these, a death oath is akin to a death sentence, hence the name. Those with death oaths are tasked on one final suicidal mission on the hope that they will be of one last use to the Imperium. If that isn't bad enough, the victory at Tarsus Ultra is short-lived. Warsmith Han Su of the Iron Warriors arrives and scours the planet via orbital bombardment. I'm assuming this was to just goad and insult the Ultramarines. The agri-world of Tarsus Ultra is lost, and the Cryptus campaign has yet to begin. It is in 998.m41 that Leviathan enters the Cryptus system. The Cryptus system and the Krypton shield that is all of the forces and defenses hastily erected to defend from the oncoming Hive Fleet are the last line of defense between Baal and Leviathan, Baal being the homeworld and location of the fortress monastery of the Blood Angels. Those who come to aid of the Crypto system are our beloved Dante and his Blood Angels, Chief Librarian Mephiston, Gabriel Seth and his Flesh Terrors, a contingent of Adeptus Sororitas, Imperial Guard, Ordo Tempestus, and the Imperial Navy. Leviathan is adapting to Defender strategies in record-breaking time, much faster than previous Hive Fleets have. The Hive Fleet manages to sail right through the Aegis, which, as far as I can tell, is a sort of pseudo-shield around the Cryptus system that is incredibly cold. It was thought that the Hive ships would freeze in transit of this zone. However, they emitted secretions before entering, and the biological hull of the ships froze, and they were encased in this secretion. And not only did it protect them from the Aegis, but it also bolstered their armor in the face of the Imperial guns in the battle fleet that awaited them on the other side. And so the Aegis ultimately backfires. It provides the Tyranids with new armor, while simultaneously making it more difficult for approaching defenders and reinforcements to reach their destination. When Hive Fleet Leviathan enters the system, the Imperial fleet mustered there immediately moves to engage it. Unfortunately, it is brushed aside with a nonchalant swipe of a bony claw. The worlds of Cryptus are invaded immediately. They include Asphodex, Lysios, Eros, Ixoi, and Tartarus. Each planet is defended by a different element of the Imperial forces. On Asphodex, General Drost leads the Imperial Guard. On Lysios, a Canoness Magda Grace leads the local nomadic tribes in a heroic defense. Valkyries of the Imperial Guard swat bioforms from the sky on the planet of Eros, and Vostroyan tank regiments fight within poison mists on the moon of Ixoi. More guardsmen fight titanic monsters on Tartarus. Towards the end of the first day of fighting, there appeared to be light at the end of the Tyranid-shaped tunnel, as costly victories were reported on Asphodex and Lysios. However, this hope was false and misplaced. Fighting had been going on for, as I said, only but a day. It was on day 2 that the hive mind made its true size and indomitable force clear. On day 2, Tyranid numbers swell. The stars in the sky above the worlds of Cryptus are blotted out by Tyranid ships, and where millions of bodies laid from the fighting on day 1, millions of more Tyranids arrive on day 2, in what must be probably the most disappointing sight you could ever imagine. The residents and defenders of Cryptus once again are in a fight for their lives. And when the sun sets on day 2, the shield worlds of the Krypton shield are broken. The Tyranids have overrun the system in a mere 2 days. Chapter Master Dante leads his Blood Angels on a counterattack, securing General Drost and his surviving forces and wresting victory from the jaws of defeat on Asphodex. Victories were recognized on Lysios and Eros as well, by the Flesh Terrors and Blood Angels' Second Company, respectively. And to throw the metaphorical wrench into the maelstrom, legions of Necrons from the Mefrit dynasty awake on Asphodex, thanks to the efforts of Enrakir the Traveler. Enrakir forges an unforeseen alliance with the Blood Angels to stand against their mutual foe. And you see, the Necrons have many mind-boggling technologies in the form of super weapons. One such weapon is the Magnovitrium, or as the Necrons put it, Star Flame. In what I can only describe as the firing of perhaps the largest Rube Goldberg machine ever created, the Tyranids are blasted with the energies of the Starflame on a system-wide scale. However, these energies do not discriminate. They kill many friendlies as well. A transcendent Catan and the Sanguinor also proved to be instrumental in the preparation of this futuristic Rube Goldberg contraption. However, as I said, it did unfortunately kill many Imperial forces as well, including Space Marines, Sisters of Battle, Imperial Guardsmen, all who were attempting to take shelter but were probably fighting and slugging their way through the endless hordes of Tyranids to get there. Not to mention shelter in the face of the incomprehensible super weapons of the Necrons may not be the shelter that you need. Once the Tyranids are dealt with, the Necrons and the Imperial forces in the Cryptus system head their separate ways. The Necrons are presumably entirely uncaring about the trials and tribulations of humanity, and on that note, the same humans have gone through far too much and have far too much on their plate to pick a fight with the Necrons. The remaining forces of Cryptus withdraw, and while it was a victory, it really only delayed the inevitable, and the inevitable is the devastation of Baal, which is up next. Okay, The Devastation of Baal is an amazing novel written by Guy Haley, and it's focused around the defense of Baal itself, which, as I mentioned, is the home planet of the Blood Angels. A lot of the book is also focused around Chapter Master Dante, which, if you read it, you will come to love him. I've also read another book by Guy Haley called Dante. Just like The Devastation of Baal, I can recommend this one as well. This is obviously even more focused around Dante and his creation, where he came from, all the trials he faced to become a Space Marine, and when he became a Space Marine, some of the most important moments in his life. It's honestly a pretty astounding book, so I can wholeheartedly recommend both of them. Okay, now there is no way I could ever possibly do The Devastation of Baal any sort of justice, so I'm not going to try to go too crazy here. I'm just going to give you a sort of brief and concise summary of the engagement in the Baal system. Now, one would not be wrong in thinking that Hive Fleet Leviathan would be all but destroyed by the Starflame Bukkake they took on the chin from the Necrons. But you would actually be wrong. As we know, the Tyranids are seemingly without number, and especially when you fill the role of the biggest bad in the setting, this, comes up even more so. And I can't help but think that Baal and the Blood Angels and all their successor chapters that rally to their defense would be completely and totally destroyed by the Tyranids if it wasn't for the alliance brokered with the Necrons and Enrico the Traveler. This battle is huge on both scales of the number of bodies involved as well as the destruction caused. And it is the largest gathering of the Sons of Sanguinius since the Horus Heresy and the Caesar Terra. And obviously the Blood Angels are there, but amongst their successor chapters that show up to aid them, they are the following: the Angels in Carmine, Angels Excelsis, Angels Glorious, Angels of Light, Angels Penitent, Angels Numinous, Angels Sanguine, Angels Vermilion, Blood Drinkers, the Blood Swords, the Blood Wings, the Brothers of Gerard, the Brothers of the Red, the Burning Blood, the Carmine Blades, the Charnel Guard, Disciples of Blood, Exsanguinators, Flesh Eaters, Flesh Terrors, Golden Sons, Knights of Blood, Red Knights, the Red Wings, the Sable Brotherhood, and the Sanguine Host. There are 12,000 Space Marines on Baal itself, 6,000 on Baal Secundus, and 5,000 on Baal Primus, another 6,000 on warships in orbit and on some orbital defense platforms. So there's roughly 29,000 Space Marines gathered to defend Baal. When the Tyranids do enter the Baal system, they are immediately set upon by a gargantuan Imperial fleet. An attack coordinated by the Master of the Fleet, a Blood Angel named Bellerophon, is largely successful, and nearly 300 hive ships are destroyed. But in classic Tyranid fashion, the fleet is quickly overwhelmed by the sheer weight of numbers when a second hive fleet is revealed from behind an uninhabitable planet named Balor. Before a single mycetic spore touches the ground of any planet or moon, the entire Space Marine chapter of the Angels Excelsis is destroyed in void combat. Now on Baal itself, on the ground, there are 3 layers of defense centered around the Arx Angelicum, which is the fortress monastery of the Blood Angels. The first layer of defense is a moat of thirst water behind which sits Space Marines and conscripts with lots and lots of guns. And if you're unfamiliar with thirst water is a malevolent sort of organism native to Baal only, and it disguises itself as water, almost like an oasis type deal, but as soon as you consume it or touch it, the body of the victim is completely purged of all water and moisture. The body's almost instantaneously withering and shriveling. Now, that may sound a little weird, but we have to remember that Baal and all of its moons are basically barren desert wastelands. They're just horrible, inhospitable environments. And I believed there is some history of nuclear war there, which is what caused all of this. And so water can be hard to come by. And so thirst water is particularly malevolent. When the Tyranids first encounter the moat of thirst water, their solution is quite simple. Fill it with bodies. Just bury it with bodies. It can only take so many. And so once the moat is filled with bodies of the smaller beasts, the larger beasts walk across them like a bridge. And in the book, there are many awesome moments. One in particular that sticks out is when a chaplain by the name of Ordomale recites a bunch of, really inspiring litanies, like in the heat of battle, perhaps bludgeoning someone, some of the defenders that are looking a little bit cowardly, and even taunts some of the Tyranids that are sort of staring at him from across the thirst water moat. And so with a moat of thirst water and copious amounts of firepower, the first 19 waves of Tyranids are heroically beat back by the first line of defense. And this is also no thanks to the void shields of the Arx Angelicum, which have protected the ground fighters from any heavy artillery from the Tyranids or any flying organisms as well. However, the first line can't stand forever, and it falls shortly after the larger warrior beasts such as Carnifexes and Exocrines cross the moat on the bridge of bodies they have created. This forces the Space Marines and the conscripts to fall back to the Arx Angelicum. The void shields are still lit, but the hive mind knows that if it is going to be successful, they need to be not lit, they need to be shut off. And so a lictor that has been planted behind enemy lines finds a derelict tunnel underneath the fortress monastery. The burrowing and tunneling digger beasts of the Tyranids are not far behind, and they tear this tunnel open, giving the swarm unfettered access to the interior of the Arx Angelicum. And the Blood Angels don't even know it yet. Now the lictor, that is now accompanied by a mass of Gene Stealers, penetrates further into the fortress. The Gene Stealers attack a hall containing the sarcophagi of Blood Angels neophytes undergoing insanguination. This is somewhat of a dirty fighting trick, although tactically sound. Insanguination is the final step any neophyte of the Blood Angels takes to becoming a proper Astartes. However, this is when they are most vulnerable. They are suspended in vats for 1 year while they undergo the transformations required to become an Astartes. They enter insanguination but a mere boy, and when they emerge, they are a full-fledged brother of the chapter, lacking only the black carapace. So they join Scout Company, 10th Company. You can see why this petty attack would enrage the Blood Angels and their successors, and so it draws their ire and attention to this hall in a spiteful sort of counterattack. This diversion allows the one lone lictor, who was split off from the Gene Stealers, to disable the Void Shield generator, and the Arx Angelicum is overrun in short order. On Baal Secundus, the Flesh Terrors and the Carmine Blades fight a similar losing battle, and it too falls, overrun by the swarm. They retreat to Baal itself. In the meantime, the Lord of Death and Chief Librarian of the Blood Angels, named Mephiston, took the most gifted members of the Librarius on a psychic journey into the realm of Khorne itself in an attempt to preoccupy a particularly spiteful bloodthirster by the name of Kabenda. Now, Mephiston had foreseen, I think he is famous for having some sort of foresight, which is notoriously a rare psychic gift. He had foreseen Kabenda's intervention in the invasion of Baal. Kabenda viewed this as almost an insult, a slight to himself. No one else is to destroy the sons of Sanguinius except for me. And honestly, Mephiston going into the realm of Khorne is probably the most Chad move I've seen in 40k. Just striding in there, dick out, swinging around. It's simply badass, and it, for me personally, puts him on in the list of my top probably 5 most powerful psychers in the Imperium. Definitely top 5, maybe the most powerful psycher. Barring perhaps the Emperor himself and like maybe Calder Drago. I don't know, guys. If you have any thoughts or comments on that, you think there's something more badass or a more powerful psycher, leave it down in the comments or shoot us an email or something. We'd like to hear it. Okay, I digress. As badass as Mephiston is, I also need to mention he is one of the few, I think one of 2 maybe, Blood Angels to ever overcome the Black Rage. He is badass. he is also unsuccessful in his ploy to preoccupy Kabanda, or perhaps even defeat him. And while the battle rages and Baal is about to fall, the Great Rift, aka the Cicatrix Maledictum, tears across the galaxy. It is formed from the destruction of the Blackstone Pylons on Cadia, after Cadia itself was destroyed, attempting to catch the fly ball that turned out to be, an entire Blackstone fortress during the 13th Black Crusade. When this happens, time bends and contorts. Things are not flowing the way they should be. The galaxy is flooded with warp energy, and Kabanda and many other demons of Khorne tear into reality on Baal Prime. And as I said, Kabanda is not letting anyone but himself destroy the Blood Angels. When all seems lost, a new fleet arrives in the skies above Baal. The Indomitus Crusade has arrived, and in what seems to be a time-bending series of events, Robute Gilliman and his new Primaris Marines come to the Savior with the Blood Angels and finish destroying this tendril of Leviathan. Dante is named Lord Commander of Imperium Nihilus, despite wishing for nothing more than the sweet release of death, which he was almost gifted at the hands of the Swarmlord. He did manage to vanquish it himself. And so wraps up the devastation of Baal, and also the Third Tyrannic War. And I'd love to talk about this book more, but I really don't want to risk spoiling the read for any of you that are really interested in it. It's a very good book. There's many things that I didn't touch on, secret little events and interactions Dante has that are genuinely very, very awesome and somewhat awe-inspiring in and of themselves. And despite knowing the general plot points, if you just listen to this whole thing, I think it's still definitely worth a read. Or listen if you're one of the few people that hasn't discovered how amazing Audible is. Okay, the Fourth Tyrannic War is on the horizon, and I plan on doing an episode on it as soon as I get the materials in front of me. I can tell you what I know so far. Leviathan approaches from the west, as we said, in Segmentum Pacificus. That region of space is wholly unprepared for such an event. Military and political leaders alike scramble to prepare. Nearby worlds are destroyed and consumed wholesale, probably by the thousands, I imagine. New bioforms are appearing to include the Screamer Killer, which is a nod to an old Carnifex model, the Neurotyrant, Von Ryan's Leapers, Barbgaunts, Neurogaunts, and there's a rumored Titanic Norn Emissary, which has been depicted in some artwork fighting Trajan Valoris while he defends Lord Solar Leontus. Yeah, that was a sentence, believe it or not. The Battle of Algrim rages. Algrim itself sort of hangs in the balance in a battle that will be decided by the players, thanks to Games Workshop's narrative event. And I don't think I've mentioned it yet, but this is the fourth one will be the largest Tyranid invasion yet. So I can only imagine if what it's going to take to stop it, considering it took that many successor chapters of the Blood Angels and the intervention of the Indomitus Crusade to stop, the Third Tyrannic War. Also, the Genestealer cult on Terra has survived the purge of the Custodians, and the tendril in Octarius has swelled to a gargantuan size. It makes me wonder if Terra itself is in danger. Will we see any sort of real Tyranid invasion on Terra? I think it would be interesting, but I'm not sure Games Workshop has the balls to do it. Nevertheless, it is quite fun to speculate, so if you're consuming this on YouTube, get down in the comments, chit-chat about it, let us know what you think is going to happen, what we know, maybe I missed something, left something out, and if I think it's worthy of everyone knowing, I'll pin some of those comments. All right, ladies and gents, this has taken me far longer than I probably should have. Writing is not my strong suit, and it's something that I probably haven't done for nearly a decade before doing this. So let me know if you'd like me to produce more content like this. It was a lot of work, but if you guys really like it for whatever reason, maybe I'll attempt another one. I'll give it another shot. Let me know what you think. Anyway, thank you for listening this long. It's going on almost an hour and 15 minutes. Wow, okay. Please don't forget to leave us a comment, give the podcast a review, follow us on Instagram. I'll leave all the links in the description, whether it's on YouTube or the episode description for wherever you listen to podcasts from. Anyway, that's it from me. I've been Garrett, and this is the Drop Pod Podcast. Thanks for listening.